Welcome everyone to Cyber Talk with Nikolay. Today we're going to be talking about incident response and we're going to dive really deep. I have a special guest that I know for a long time and he has handled way too many incidents, so knows a lot, and conversation is going to be really lovely. So Aaron Goldstein, he's been in industry probably for good 20 plus years and handled a few dozens, if not more, incidents, big and small. So I'm not gonna steal his presentation from himself, so I'm gonna just be brief and turn it over to Aaron to let him introduce himself, and then we're gonna start diving deep into incident response.
Yeah, thanks, Nikolay. Really excited to be here today and to work with you again. I'm Aaron Goldstein. I'm head of security operations and incident response here at Todyl, and I've got about 15 years of digital forensics and incident response background. A lot of different IR consulting firms, as well as a few large-scale organizations doing incident response, threat hunting, and investigation and forensics. So really great. And one of the things I always think is really interesting is one of the stories I like to tell about working with Nikolay was he was one of the first people that asked me to sleep in a conference room during a major incident. I flew out there and I was helping him out, and it's probably 3 a.m. I said, okay, well, I'm going to go back to the hotel. And he said, no, how about we just catch a few hours sleep here at the conference room? I'll bring in breakfast in the morning. I will never forget that, Nikolay.
Oh man, you're giving out all the secrets. Yay, sometimes it just happens when you go to battle, you have to fight the battle.
This is true.
Yeah. All right. Now it sounds good. Yeah, I know we've then gone through a lot of different things and experience been great. So I think it would be helpful today if you can spend a little bit time, like from your perspective, let's say, what are the good things, and I'm gonna just get at the high level, would be for incident response. Like when you go into the battle, what is the good things to have? Like knowledge, people, teams, or any other things. Like from your experience, you've done a lot of incident response and you've seen pretty much everything under the sun, whatever was happening. And I know we've done together a lot of threat hunting and did a lot of threat intelligence research. So there are a lot of things you can bring to the incident. But I think every organizations when incident strikes, usually it's like, hey, where do I go? It's like, what do I need to start with, and how do I prepare myself to respond to incidents when it strikes?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think preparedness and being proactive is the number one step. The reality is, if you're an organization that doesn't have an IR plan or other preparations in place, when a major incident scrambling, but you're going to spend and waste a lot of time looking for different activity, who to contact, who might be involved, and kind of a lot of questions up in the air at once. So the first thing I always like to do is suggest making an incident response plan. Now, when you think of an IR plan, if those of you that are listening, you might think of a binder of a bunch of pages that are just collecting dust, or a file sitting on a share somewhere that nobody opens up very often. But if you can properly create an IR plan, keep it up to date, and just periodically review it, making sure that who those people that you need to contact are. Everyone always thinks, okay, well, let me think about my security team, but the reality is it's so much more complex than that now. You need to be making sure that your leadership and management are involved, your legal and compliance team if you have them, marketing and public relations, and all of these other areas. They're all really important to making sure that not only are you responding effectively, but you're letting your customers or organizations that are impacted be aware of what's happening without giving away too much information. So having an IR plan that kind of outlines major types of incidents that could happen. The way I like to do that is look through your organization at the types of incidents you've encountered in the last year or two, and make plans for those. How does that work? Okay, who needs to be involved? What are the major thresholds, right? So when a key trigger happens, sensitive accessed or remote access was granted or a signing key was stolen, those types of things. What you want to do is make sure that you have a basic plan of action ready to go, understanding that as it's happening, it might change. You might have to be dynamic in your response, but we can always update that IR plan later. But having one in place, knowing where it is and who to contact is one of the biggest things. Beyond that, the other thing I think is really interesting and important to know is not every organization is going to have the size, the budget, and the people for a full IR team, for a full security team. And so recognizing when to basically invoke a consulting firm or third party or assistance can also be equally helpful. So if you're not in a situation where you have a giant security team, knowing who to contact, whether it's the IR provider that you have a contract in place with, or a retainer, or reaching out and proactively setting that up, can save a lot of time. So, for example, small organization gets hit by ransomware. They have no cyber liability insurance. They have no IR retainer in place. They're going to call one of the main IR providers out there, and they're going to spend hours, if not close to a day, working on contract and scoping calls and understanding what's happening, all before they can even start and hit the ground running. Whereas if you work and build that relationship ahead of time, you can get started right away. You let them know, and usually within about an hour or so, they're collecting evidence and starting. So whether you have your own team to do that or you need a third party, super helpful in that regard. If it is an internal team, making sure that they're trained and ready for an incident. I've seen a lot of IR teams get a little complacent because they're not seeing a bunch of activity, and if they're not actively exploring new threats and investigating on a regular basis, they might become rusty and slow down that response, or make some mistakes along the way. So making sure, if you do have an IR team or a security team, make sure that they are trained up, they're familiar with these types of activities and how to perform those investigations. Super helpful. You can also do things like what we call tabletop exercises, and we can practice different types of incidents. See not only from a technical perspective of what decisions are being made and what triggers there are, but also from a managerial perspective. How is your organization going to respond to a $10 million ransom demand? How are they going to respond to your organization's customer data and employee data being posted on a website for a ransomware threat actor? So things like that are all different things that can be done via a tabletop exercise to practice, to understand what that might be, and thus speeding up the event if there is a real incident. Super helpful in that regard.
Got it, got it. Now that's super helpful, Aaron. And I think I would try to break down a little bit because you mentioned a lot of things. So let's say when you have multinational organization moving billions around, so they obviously have the budget to hire a full staff team and do all this 24 by 7 versus, as people say, America runs on the small businesses. And majority of those small businesses, they probably don't have that much in their budget and the purse to go and spend money to build a team. And in most cases, they're just trying to run their business to make money. And security is not something that is going to move them forward. They just need to be protected. So, in case, let's say, those small businesses, how would you go about, and what would be the best recommendation to say, well, if you have a team of one individual or five individual running your small business, and that five individual, they serve all the roles. They're active directory managers, they're IT managers, they're security professional, they're all kind of jack of all trades, just because they're just trying to do whatever they can to keep the company going. But when incident happens, usually in those cases, they're in dire straits. It's like, well, now I never really dealt with it. It's like, what do I do? It's like for small businesses, and again, they don't really have that much luxury to go and do all the fancy things that, okay, I'm going to do tabletop exercise, I'm going to do that one. So they just need to turn to somewhere and get help. So what would you recommend and for them to go, and what do they need to do to at least protect themselves and have some kind of level of assurance that an incident does happen, they will be able to get some help?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that you can go about it that are super helpful. The first I would say is exploring the option of cyber liability insurance. And the reason for that, it can be a headache. Let's just be honest. The questionnaires and the details required to set up cyber liability insurance can be a bit cumbersome. However, once that's in place, especially for a small organization, one person shop that's IT and security and day to day, one thing that can be really helpful there is when there is an incident, you contact your liability insurance carrier, and they will assign an IR provider. They will assign a breach coach, which is your lawyer or legal counsel in that regard, for this. And it can be really, really helpful to make sure that the proper processes are followed. So, for example, small organization that maybe stores sensitive information or maybe health information, something along those lines, there's going to be a lot of compliance requirements that they may not realize that they have a deadline to actually report this incident in a certain amount of time. And so, if they are a small organization trying to just struggle through it by themselves, they might miss that and end up being penalized or financially fined for that type of thing. So insurance carriers can be a great way to make sure that everything is being met from that regard. They're going to handle things like the PR notifications, credit monitoring, and all of that as well. Can be really, really useful for an organization that's very small. What I would also say is for any organization that has larger IT and security needs, reaching out to an MSP or MSSP that can help handle that on their behalf can be a great way to kind of outsource some of that requirement from the internal team that's handling things to a more experienced team that can offset that. So in those types of cases, having an MSP or an MSSP that's monitoring and continuously reviewing alerts and threat hunting and performing a lot of those security standards that may not happen on a small team can be really useful for preventing an incident or at least getting ahead of it before it gets too bad. So, for example, an MSP or MSSP that's monitoring that behavior, when the initial alert happens for something suspicious, they should be investigating that immediately. That way, it doesn't get to the point where the threat actor is furthering their objectives with ransomware, data exfiltration, extortion, things like that.
Got it, got it. No, that's super helpful, and definitely organizations can take advantage of that, and I've seen it happening. So when they use cyber insurance, and it covers a lot of expenses, even when they need to go through and do investigation, because that's one of the things that when incident strikes, you need to have at least some kind of protection on the back end. Is like, yeah, knowing that you're going to spend an absorbent amount of money to respond to incident, because none of the IR resources come cheap. Most of them are quite expensive, and depends on, I guess, what situation you're in, the prices can go up by an hour. So having cyber insurance, it essentially alleviates some of the costs and headaches after deal with, and getting everything prepared ahead of time, it definitely helps. So, from your perspective, let's say for organizations when they have staff they can build, how would you recommend? What was your experience like in building the team? Or what are the key elements that somebody needs to have on a team to make sure that the internal team is prepared for the incident? What kind of skill they need to have? Or all the participation tabletop exercises are great, but once you do them regularly, that kind of the skills get forgotten. So, how would you say those organizations need to stay active and to make sure that right individuals are skilled enough to handle the incidents, and what are the valuable skills that they need to have to battle modern cybersecurity incidents?
Yeah, great question. I think first off, having visibility into what's happening in a network or on endpoints and SaaS applications and third-party tools, understanding what's happening in the environment is going to be the biggest aspect and biggest hurdle for a lot of organizations. If you don't have visibility into what's happening on different endpoints or by users or different tools, it's going to become a very difficult job to perform incident response. So having the tools ahead of time to make sure that you are logging all your activity to a SIEM, make sure that you have EDR and other technologies in place to prevent malicious behavior, and the ability to investigate them when they do fire off alerts is really, really important. So I would say making sure that your technology stack is capable of providing that level of detail is number one. After that, it's really important to have experience using those tools to pull the data that you want. So being able to appropriately investigate alerts from your EDR module, being able to successfully navigate your SIM and look for logon activity or software installations, whatever it might be, all that data, having access to it and being able to query it effectively, really helpful. And then for more skilled incident response teams and functionality, more mature systems, what I would suggest is creating a forensic collection script, which is going to gather all the details from the systems that are impacted and then collect all those artifacts so you can parse them, usually in an automated fashion. So, for example, we would basically roll out a script that's going to collect your registry hives and a lot of other key files and locations off an endpoint or a number of endpoints. We're going to process all that and start putting together a picture of what happened and when. What activities were executed, what users were involved, was there lateral movement. All these types of things can be helpful to help construct not just what happened with an incident, but what is the scope? Is this one system that got popped, or is this the sign of a larger incident or threat that might be across multiple systems or an entire domain at that point? So understanding that can be really helpful. And then what I think is also really helpful is understanding the MITRE attack framework. I know you probably hear that term a lot. And from my perspective, what I think is really useful there is understanding what techniques and what stage of an attack the threat actors are in. Are they initially collecting access? Are they trying to escalate their privileges? Or have they already done all that and they've already moved on to the domain controllers and they're pushing out malware or doing other things? So understanding where the threat actors might be based on a given alert or activity can be super helpful. So familiarity with the attack framework can be really helpful there. And then practice with other tools, right? So depending on what you need, if you're going to be doing memory forensics, for example, you can spend weeks or months preparing and practicing with memory images and using tools like volatility to pull that data and analyze it rather. Super, super helpful and can get you a lot of information. A lot of next generation EDR and AV tools out there will also provide a lot of insight into that. So becoming intimately familiar with those tools and how they work will make your life a lot easier, as well as being prepared for threat hunting, looking and getting into a position where before an incident starts, what are some of those initial indicators that might be a sign that a threat actor is staging or is performing an attack. So being able to understand what good looks like and then what anomalous activity looks like as well. And that can be done with a number of different tools, and things like machine learning can be really great for looking at anomalous behavior. If you can baseline, where users are normally logging in from, and what their average amount of traffic is, where they're logging into Azure or AWS or Office 365 from, and things like that can be super helpful. So that visibility goes way beyond just the endpoint. Things like logging Microsoft 365, for example, Office activity, being able to log that and know when an inbox rule is created, for example, or this user normally logs in from Nashville, Tennessee. Today they're logging in from Bolivia. Those types of things are all really helpful in understanding, where those outliers are, and gives you a jump start to perform an investigation.
Thank you, everyone, for joining for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, Cyber Talk with Nikolay and our guest speaker, Aaron Goldstein.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about these topics or IS Squared, please go to www.issquaredinc.com.